You're listening to Kate Palmer from SparkleTart.com, and today we're going to create our own resist cardstock. I'm using some gorgeous products from Lindy's Stamp Gang. Now first, we're just going to have a look at what makes up a piece of resist cardstock. The majority of resist cardstock on the market has a plain or light coloured background. It has some kind of an image printed onto it, and occasionally, like this piece, the image is also embossed. So you can see that where I'm pointing at here, the butterfly and the swirls, when you tilt them to the light, there is actually a resist coating on there. Now, there are lots of different brands. The resist cardstocks seem to come in and out of fashion, which makes it very difficult to continue to get a piece that you really like. You can see this one has a little bit of a yellow touch, and it doesn't have the resist printed across the entire card, it's just on the edges. This next piece has no actual printed image, the only patterning is from the resist. This is less common, but you do get them sometimes. Now, this last piece would be my favourite. It has some light grey images, it has some black or darker grey text, and then it has a continuous pattern printed across the surface. That's what I'm going to show you how to replicate. To create your own piece of resist cardstock, you'll need some smooth card. I've just grabbed something from the office supply store, but if you'd like a 12 by 12 piece, you can use Basil Smoothies. The next thing you'll need is a waterproof ink. I like Ranger's archival inks because they come in lots of pretty colours. I'm going to be using watering can and jet black. The next thing you'll need to make your resist super yummy is some Lindy's Stamp Gang embossing powder. I'm using Angel Wings Jade. You can see it's a very pale colour with a green shimmer. You'll also need some assorted stamps. To replicate the look I showed you in the beginning of the clip, you'll need something with a flourish or swirl, a text stamp with kind of loopy writing so you can't read what it says, and then if you wanted to use a stamp to create your resist background, you'll need something with relatively bold designs. Fine detail stamps don't work well for the resist. Beginning with your swirl or flourish stamp and your lightest colour ink, which in this case is the watering can, ink up your stamp. You'll then want to stamp off onto a piece of scrap paper to lighten the image even further. This will make sure that your background doesn't overwhelm whatever you end up using your card for. Now, you don't have to stamp on scrap paper. You could always stamp in a journal or on another piece of cardstock. Either way, when you apply the image, it will be a paler version of what you would otherwise have stamped. As you can see, it's got a bit of variation. This is what you want on a background. You do not want something that's going to overpower your finished card. Continue applying ink to the stamp, stamping off, and applying the image to your background paper until you have it covered to your satisfaction. Don't cover the whole thing because remember, it is a background. Now I'm going to do exactly the same thing with my text stamp and my jet black archival ink. Ink the stamp, stamp a little of the ink off onto some scrap paper, and then apply it to your background. Again, you don't really want this background imagery taking over. It's just there to add a little interest. Next, I'm going to create the resist portion of this card using my Lindy's Stamp Gang embossing powder. It's a good idea to run an embossing buddy over the background that you've already stamped, just to sort of prevent the embossing powder from sticking to any fingerprints. Next, using a Versamark watermark ink pad, ink up your bold designed stamp and stamp this across either all or part of your cardstock, depending on what you want. The next step is to cover your stamped image with the embossing powder. Now make sure that you're generous here, you don't want to have spotty uncovered areas. Tap off the excess and pop it back into the bottle. Heat your embossing powder with a heat tool. Be careful not to overcook it because if it sinks into the background, it won't work as a resist as effectively. Once it's heated, the embossing powder will create a raised effect. That gorgeous green is from the special two-tone effect in the Lindy's Stamp Gang powders. If you are using a clear embossing powder, you wouldn't get that same effect. If this is a bit too plain for you, a bit too subtle, there is a way to jazz it up a bit, and that's what I'm going to show you now, how to sparkle tart it up a little. For this slightly different version of the technique, you'll need a translucent coloured embossing powder and some coloured archival ink pads. I'm going to be using aquamarine and deep purple. For this more colourful version of the background, I've chosen to use Lindy's Stamp Gang embossing powder in Madonna Robe Blue Gold. This will give a gorgeous finish. I'm just going to use the same stamps as the first background since they looked so pretty. You'll want to start with your palest ink again and that flourish, and follow the same process as I showed you previously. Once you have enough of the flourish to cover at least some of the background, move to the deep purple ink and your text stamp. Just add a little of this. The purple can be a bit overwhelming, so just choose carefully. Now this is where we change it up a bit. I'm going to be using this beautiful flourish stencil from Memory Box, and this will give me a much bolder background than the stamp. This works best if your stencil covers the piece of cardstock that you're going to use for your background. If you're using a scrapbook page, you'll need to do sort of partial images, so try not to do anything with straight lines. Pick something a bit more abstract. Squish that Versamark pad right through the stencil, and then generously cover with the embossing powder. I'm using the Lindy's Stamp Gang Madonna Robe Blue Gold, and you'll see why in a minute. Heat with an embossing gun to set the powder, and you're done. Well, almost anyway. This is why I've used the Lindy's Stamp Gang Madonna Robe Blue. You get this gorgeous blue colour. It's semi-translucent so you can still see the pattern behind it. And when you tilt it, that stunning two-tone effect that Lindy's Stamp Gang is so well known for. I love the fact that this has a little bit of a gold shimmer on that blue. Technically, my resist background is finished at this point, but I couldn't leave it without showing you why this is so stunning. I'm going to be using Teapot Purple and Blue Hawaiian Blue from Lindy's Stamp Gang in the Starburst sprays. Spray the starbursts directly over your resist background. This is going to look absolutely stunning. It also helps to know what colours you're going to use at the start, so you can either coordinate your embossing powder or contrast it. All I'm doing is adding the purple to the bottom, the blue to the top, kind of in a diagonal pattern, and then I'm tapping off the excess. So check your background. If there are any patches where the colour hasn't taken evenly, like this spot here, just spray it again and then tap off any excess liquid. You're aiming for a beautiful even finish to your background. It'll make your project look that much nicer. And this finished background is why I just can't resist, pun intended, Lindy's Stamp Gang and Resist card. And this is what I've made using my gorgeous Resist background. I love how this turned out. I've added some ribbons, just sort of some ribbon scraps, all in similar colours to the background. I've used quite a few organza or sheer ribbons, so you can see the background through it. It looks so pretty. I've stuck to the same colour palette, using the same archival inks to create my embellishments, like this little journey label. I've also matched the background cardstock to everything on the front, so it all ties in and coordinates. The blue embossing powder looks stunning against all of these embellishments, especially when you tilt it to the light. I've coloured the embellishments with a combination of Teapot Purple Starburst Spray and Pop Rocks Purple Colour Shot. The little bird I've done with the Pop Rocks Purple Embossing Powder, which is brand new. Isn't it gorgeous? I've also dipped the little wooden heart embellishments into the Pop Rock Purple to colour them, so that everything matches. I've wrapped the stem from one of the roses around the bird charm to look like a bit of a branch, just a bit of added extra. The little hearts aren't hugely coloured, they've just got a bit of something. The colour I've used to colour those little blue flowers is Tilt-A-Wheel Teal, and it's one of the brand new embossing powders from Lindy's Stamp Gang Under the Boardwalk set. Now, anything else on here that's coloured, I've used those same colours, so Teapot Purple, Blue Hawaiian Blue, or Pop Rocks Purple. I think this might be my favourite Resist project so far. and I'm pretty sure it's down to that gorgeous embossing powder from Lindy's Stamp Gang. I've really enjoyed making this card. I've loved making it coordinate. I've loved colouring all the elements, the sparkle and the resist. There's just been something about it that was so much fun. I hope you've enjoyed watching. I'll be back with more soon.